Good morning, everybody. On behalf of the Addison County Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to welcome you to our Candidates Forum this morning. My name is Bruce Zeman. I'm the General Manager and morning radio show host of the Wake Up Crew with Bruce and Hobbs on 92.1 WVTK FM radio here in Middlebury. I will be the moderator for today's forum, and I'd also like to let everyone know that our event today is also being broadcast live on WVTK and can be seen on Middlebury Community Television. Before I introduce all the candidates and talk a little bit about the rules, I'd like to introduce the chairman of the Addison County Chamber of Commerce, Tim Buskey. Tim?
Thank you very much, Bruce. Welcome from the Chamber of Commerce in Addison County to all of you who are both watching on television, listening in the radio, or here in person to ask questions. This is our first and only Candidates Forum for this year. We understand that there are not a great deal of contested races, but to us in the business community and the chamber community as members, we are extremely interested in hearing your answers. We'd like to thank the Ilsley Library for the use of our room this morning. We really appreciate the ability to use it. We also would like to thank WVTK for broadcasting this, MCTV for filming it so they can broadcast it again, and we look forward to your candidates' answers. So it's all yours, Bruce.
Okay, thank you very much, Tim. During today's forum, we'll be hearing from candidates in both contested and uncontested races. Before I go over the rules for today's forum, I'd like to introduce all the participants, and I'm going to begin with the contested races. For State Senator, Democratic candidate Chris Bray and his opponent, Independent candidate Robert Wagner. For State Representative Addison District Number 2, which is the towns of Cornwall, Goshen, Hancock, Leicester, Ripton, and Salisbury, Democratic candidate and incumbent Representative Willem Jewett, and his opponent, Independent candidate Tim Ryan. For State Representative in Addison District Number 3, which is the towns of Addison, Ferrisburg, Panton, Vergennes, and Waltham, Democratic candidate and incumbent Representative Diane Lanfer, Republican candidate and incumbent Representative Greg Clark, and Democratic candidate Arabella Holzapfel. For State Representative in Addison District Number 5, which are the towns of Bridport, New Haven, and Weybridge, Republican candidate and incumbent Representative Harvey Smith, and his challenger, Democratic candidate Ed McGuire. Now moving on to candidates for some of the uncontested races. For State Representative in Addison District Number 1, which is the town of Middlebury, Democratic candidates and incumbents Representatives Betty Nuovo and Paul Ralston. For State Representative in Addison District Number 4, which are the communities of Bristol, Lincoln, Moncton, and Starksboro, Democratic candidates and incumbents Representatives Mike Fisher and David Sharp. And finally, for State Representative in Addison Rutland District Number 1, which are the communities of Benson, Orwell, Shoreham, and Whiting, Independent candidate and incumbent Representative Will Stevens. Now that we've met the candidates, let's quickly discuss the rules for today. We have developed a list of 5 questions on a variety of topics, including health care, education, state pensions, tax policy, and energy. The focus of today's forum is primarily on the contested races, but every candidate here today will have an opportunity to speak. The format of today's forum will be as follows. I will ask a question on one of the topics mentioned above, and all of the 9 candidates will have 1 minute to answer the question. Because of the number of candidates today that are here, I'm going to hold you to 1 minute. That's what I have the stopwatch for. So that everyone has an opportunity to speak, when I tell you that your time is up, please hold any further comments. I would also ask the candidates to all be respectful of each other and not interrupt. Every one of the candidates in the contested races will have an opportunity to answer all 5 questions. At the conclusion of the question and answer period for the candidates in contested races, the candidates in the uncontested races will be giving 2 minutes to speak on any topic he or she wishes. Again, I ask the other candidates to be respectful, let the candidate finish, and not interrupt. At this point, time permitting, I will be asking 1 or 2 questions that I've come up with on my own, and I will ask all the candidates to answer. None of the candidates or anyone else in this room besides Andy Mayer and myself knows the 2 questions that I have come up with myself. They're good questions, so I can promise you that. In the event that time does not permit that, we will go directly to a question and answer period from the audience. During that period, the audience members can ask any candidate a question on any subject, and the candidate will have 1 minute to reply, and the question will be directed only to that candidate. In other words, we can't have 9 people answer the same question. Again, for the purposes of letting everyone be heard, I would ask that everyone please be respectful in both your comments, responses, and again, because of the amount of candidates we have here, we really have to hold to the time, okay? So our first question has to do with the topic of health care. So to all the candidates in the contested races, we'll get it started with, how would Green Mountain Health Care, otherwise known as single-payer health care, be funded in Vermont? If it is to be funded by taxes, which ones would you raise, and by how much? And for this question, I first go to Chris Bray. Chris?
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you to WVTK and the Chamber, Ilsley Library, and Middlebury Community TV for hosting the event. The other thing I just want to pass along very quickly is the regrets of Senator Claire Ayer, who has a Healthcare Oversight Committee pre-existing commitment and can't join us today, although she would have liked to. So let me jump right into the question. I think in Vermont we have a great opportunity in terms of what we can do better in healthcare, and there's 2 things I would say. One is that unfortunately at the moment we have a system that focuses much more on illness management than promoting health and health care. So I think there's an opportunity to shift to more wellness programs. For instance, the Blueprint for Health is a step in that direction. The second thing is that we have, I'd say, an adversarial system in terms of billing and contesting bills, and that we spend a lot of money chasing money. So the movement to the healthcare exchange and Green Mountain Healthcare will be, I think, a very positive thing in terms of putting partners together that all share a common goal. In terms of taxes, to get to the pointed part of the question.
Chris, we have 15 seconds, okay?
I'd say that in the coming session, we're going to be looking at a budget coming over from the administration, and the legislature will have to respond to that. I wouldn't deliver a forecast for how that budget will be developed, and that because of the complexity of it, but I know that the legislature will look carefully at it and pass a thoughtful budget that follows up on the first steps in Green Mountain Healthcare.
Okay, I next direct the same question to Mr. Wagner.
Good morning. Vermont is the only state that gives away all its natural resources to corporations. The UVM Gund Institute valued those resources at approximately $1.2 billion per year. And what are those resources? We give our groundwater away to bottlers who pay next to nothing. We give our telecommunications away to media corporations, and they pay nothing. We give our logs away to the Weyerhaeusers of the world, and they go to China so they can sell it back to us as lumber. None of that creates any jobs. We give our minerals away to Omia. They bring in their own people. They even wanted us to build a railroad spur so that it would be easier for them to take out our minerals at public expense. And what does this legislature do? Nothing. There is no funding problem. There's a problem of 1%ers taking away our resources for out-of-state, often foreign corporations who pay nothing into Vermont, not 1 red cent. So we could be rich. We could be paying for this stuff, health care, it's vital. We could be rebuilding our infrastructure, which is in sad shape, but we're not. So we need a turnover in the legislature. We need a citizen legislature that will act in the interests of the people of Vermont, not in the interests of corporations, and not as told to by paid out-of-state lobbyists. Thank you.
Representative Jewett.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Andy, Tim, listeners and viewers. Thank you for your time. This is an important time in our election cycle. The question was about Green Mountain Care and how it would be funded. And we were asked a similar question by the newspaper, and the answers will come out this week. My answer is partially that it's a premature question. That right now our focus in the legislature needs to be the effective implementation of the exchange program. Everyone knows that the waivers from the federal government, which would make Green Mountain Care possible, are not available until 2017. But we also know that we have an exchange program that's rolling out at the end of 2013. And there's only one legislative period, one session between now and then. So from my perspective, it's critical that we make the exchange rollout effective. That program it's a product of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, brings $200 to $300 million in premium relief to Vermonters. It's a critical piece of health care reform. We certainly need to move to the next phase after that.
Mr. Ryan.
I don't think Vermont should move towards a single-payer health care system. I think we should set up the exchange, which the federal government says we have to set up. But to me, this just raises more questions than answers. We haven't gotten any information on how much it's going to cost to set this up, how much it's going to cost to maintain it, what are the rates going to be, what kind of options are we going to have in coverage. We haven't seen any of that information. So to me, it just raises a lot more questions. And like Mr. Jewett said, how do we know how are we going to fund it until we know how much it's going to cost? Other states have set up successful exchanges. The state of Utah has a very successful healthcare exchange with many options, and I think that's the direction Vermont should move forward to. But the key to the Utah Health Exchange is options. There's hundreds of policies, and the earliest, what I understand is they're going to eliminate a lot of options from the healthcare as far as high deductible policies, and they're going to direct us all into one single system that everybody's going to fit into. And I would much rather have more control over my health care than that. Thank you.
Representative Clark.
Thanks, Bruce. And thank the Chamber once again for hosting us. I'm very glad that I've been placed once again in the middle of two tables with a crack down the middle so that I can continue to state quite seriously that I'm willing to work on both sides of the table. My thoughts on the healthcare thing have been pretty well answered, I think, up to this point. I think Willem is right. I think it's a little bit early. And I think Chris and others have mentioned the dilemma that we are in. Here's what I think is important. I think people deserve choices, more choices, not fewer choices. And I think the fact that we didn't know that the governor spoke ahead of this program saying, well, I'll give you the details of how much it's going to cost and who's going to pay for it after the election is telling. Maybe nobody knew. My point is that if nobody knew, that I think that we've got to spend a lot of time figuring that out. I don't think it's good for the legislature to put ourselves in a position of pushing ahead on a program which we don't know what it's going to cost or who's going to pay for it. So having said that, the exchange, for example, may not be a bad idea at all as long as there are options available. So I'm willing to look ahead to the legislative year knowing that there are people that are going to be crunching these numbers every day. And I'm certainly willing to listen to all sides of the argument and vote my conscience on what will be good for Vermont.
Ms. Holzapfel?
Thanks, Bruce, and thanks to the Chamber and everyone else mentioned already. I'm going to offer a personal anecdote. Late July, I broke my foot. Last week, 3 months later, I got a form from an organization I've never heard of asking me how it happened and, was it at home, was it in a car accident, was it whatever, in order to track down who should pay for this. I don't understand why it should matter. I'm a human being who got hurt. Just get it paid for. And we need to streamline how these things are administered. It shouldn't matter how it happened. It shouldn't matter who I work for. It shouldn't matter how much I earn. And as far as funding goes, understand that if there is a single-payer program, which is, as everyone has said, it's down the road, it's not going to happen immediately, but when there is a single-payer program, we won't have insurance premiums. So that piece of your expense now will be renamed some kind of tax. But that's my understanding, and that's I support single-payer health care for those reasons.
Representative Landfer.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting us here, too. We've been working on health care for decades now, and I believe that we have made some significant, great strides in the right direction. You know, sometimes going slow is the important thing to do. I have been out door to door for probably the last 3 election cycles into probably 9,000 doors now, and they may be getting tired of seeing me at this point. But health care and the rising costs of not just in the care industry, but in the premiums and the insurance and what is covering has been one of the number one constituent issues that I hear about. And when I go out and speak with them. Now, as we go forward, as everyone knows, I don't think it's any surprise, the timeline. And if there are those that would like to dig into this more, there are fabulous information on the website on the healthcare reform, and I believe that you'll probably be able to find a link to that from the Addison County Chamber's website, as probably even through WVTK's website. So there's no surprise that what we're working towards are about 4 things at the same time. We are looking for health care coverage, insurance coverage for all Vermonters, okay? But not just that alone. That is not the only reform that is in the works at the moment. We are also looking at holding down the cost of health care. We are also looking at containing the premium growth costs. And we're also looking at improving the health of Vermonters. It doesn't work if we do all of that and it still isn't getting the job done that's taking care of Vermonters. In January, we will be receiving, or we're scheduled to receive, the financial package. We'll look at it, amend it, and I'm sure we'll be engaged in more conversations as that goes forward. Thank you.
Direct a question to Mr. McGuire.
Thanks, Bruce, and thanks to everyone that's hosted this important forum, and I'm honored to be here. There are over 200,000 Vermonters who don't have adequate health care, and I count among those my daughter and her family who live up in Essex Junction, so this is close to home for me. The legislator has to focus on the first part of the health care equation in the coming session, and that is the health insurance, the exchange, which is we have to set up according to the federal mandate. And in that exchange, individuals and small businesses will be able to select the appropriate health care package that meets their needs and their budget. And that's where the work is going to be. I think the costs of the actual health care, which we all deserve to have, quality, affordable, and accessible health care that requires everybody to be in the pool, no pre-existing conditions, cause for disqualification. All those things are things I support, and I look forward to working towards that. But the immediate and first step of this equation is getting the exchanges set up and working properly.
And finally, Representative Smith.
Yes, thank you, and again, thank the Chamber for putting this program together this morning. The question was how we fund the Green Mountain Health Care and which tax increases we'll have. And, you know, we this past year did the exchange, and we created 3 different options for individuals to go. So there is some options there for different companies to look at and see what they want to do. So that's probably a step in the right direction. However, I don't think we went far enough with that exchange, and we really should have opened it up like some of the other states did to a vast variety of insurance options, and they actually saw their premiums go down substantially during that period of time. So that's one model. The other part of it is which taxes to increase, and we don't know what the cost is going to be. We don't know what's going to be covered. We don't know who's going to be affected by it. We don't know whether we're going to have the private sector that has their own self-insurance programs are going to be part of this or not at this point in time. And we will not know that until 2017. And then we have 5 years to put a program into place. Hopefully it won't take nearly that long. But my concern is that it creates a lot of uncertainty for the business community as to whether they should expand here, whether they should grow here, what are the tax implications of that. And we need to be very careful about increasing taxes or what kind of tax shifts are going to be out there in order to fund these kind of programs, and what the impact that's going to have on our business community, because it's our economic driver. The business community is the economic driver that needs to be strong and healthy in order to be able to pay for any programs we have, including the health care program. So thank you.
Our second question in our forum today pertains to education. The question is, how can it be that a town can level fund their budget for their schools, yet still see property taxes rise? And for this one, we go to Mr. Ryan. You're up first.
Question. I don't know. My taxes went up 15% last year. The town of Salisbury didn't spend any more money. I have no idea why my taxes went up 15%. Once the state of Vermont passed Act 60 in 1997, the state of Vermont took control of the education funding. And ever since that time, we've seen nothing but a steady rise in taxes and a steady rise in spending in education. So I really can't answer that question. I wish somebody here could. So thank you.
Representative Jewett.
There's some easy answers to that. I'd be glad to answer that. We pay our property taxes based on per pupil spending. I've been a member of the Ripton School Board for over a dozen years. We've set budgets year after year. It's not just how much you spend. It's how many kids you have in your school. If you have a declining population, the equation doesn't work all that well. And we shouldn't want it any other way, frankly. Because if we just sent the money out, even though you had a declining population, there'd be no incentive to control costs. I can tell you how difficult it is in our budget discussions when we realize that we have less kids in the school and we got to cut the budget down. And that's what we do. Act 60 was drafted and passed by a Democratic legislature. I was not there for that. Act 68 was passed by a Republican House. I voted for it. I voted for it because it favored my towns, and it favored all the towns in Addison County. That is not to say that property taxes aren't a great strain on everyone's budget. They are, and we need to do more work on them. But Act 68 brings you, among other things, income sensitivity, which benefits about 2/3 of our residents.
Thank you. Ms. Holzapfel?
Thanks, Bruce. The local school boards develop their budgets, but the disbursements come from the state level in part because the state has knowledge of individuals' income. They can arrange for income sensitivity in property taxes. And as someone whose household goes in varying levels of employment from two people both working full-time, 100% employed to part-time to variations of that, I am very grateful that there is income sensitivity for our property taxes. That has helped us a lot. So I think between, as Willem explained, the per pupil spending, helping school boards develop wise budgets, and the income sensitivity, I think this has been a good step.
Thank you. Representative Lanfer.
Thank you. I believe Vermonters expect an equal educational opportunity for their children and still afford to live in their homes. These are the balances that both at a town level, school board levels, and in the state that we struggle with and strike to balance. But school boards in your districts work very, very hard. Matter of fact, they don't get enough credit at times. They're the hard workers to maintain the budget that balances the needs of their children with the economic surroundings within their community, and it is not an easy task to do. And it is because of their diligence that school budgets are passed around this state with very high margins, and I don't think that very, very few school budgets are in contention. The legislature had asked a lot of questions, somewhat similar to what we're being asked today. There was a series of questions that we sent out and asked a forum and sought 5 experts to go out and look at. And in January of 2012, a report came back to us, and that report was called An Evaluation of Vermont's Education Finance System. Okay. which I won't read to you here today, but it does provide a lot of information on where we are statewide in that. But overall, the findings in that report, they stated
15 seconds.
The overall findings in the funding system, it is working well, and it is meeting the goals of Act 60 and Act 68. And our system is described in terms of property tax-based system that is adjusted for income.
Thank you. Representative Clark.
One of the struggles that we have in education is trying to figure out how to do a better job when we know we're in the midst of getting less money. / we know that the only way we get more money is by raising taxes. So I think one of the things the legislature can do is listen very carefully, as we do I'm on the House Education Committee, to listen to the schools that are doing a good job. There are some. We never hear about them because they never grab the headlines in the newspaper. So figuring out in education, number one, I think, what is it we want from our education system? And I think there ought to be a statewide forum on that. And number two, with that in mind, figuring out how do we do a better job when we know that we're getting less money. And again, I think there are a lot of schools that are doing that. I think that the legislature cannot take away any more of the responsibility from local school boards than has already been done. Local school boards are an important part of our education system. They have been since the state began, and I think that's got to continue. We will hope in the future that we'll be able to bring the different groups together that are involved in education, and particularly the funding of it, so that there's a little bit more of a collaboration between school board and state rather than a kind of an adversarial role. We're working on...
You have 15 seconds.
We're working on making sure, for example, that kids are tested in such a way that shows that they're improving in schools. We think that's a very important part of education because we all want our kids to be doing a better job every year. So there's work to be done. We're working on it.
Thank you. Representative Smith.
Yes, education funding has already been a difficult one for me. When Act 60 was passed, the average cost of education was around $7,000 per student. Right now it's around $17,000 per student, and I talked to a person in Sudbury yesterday. It was $21,000 per student in the town, and so we have not been able to control those costs. Act 60 created a mechanism that was really easy to collect dollars across because it's based on the appraised value of your home, and that goes up on a regular basis, and the appraised value of a home does not have any correlation with the ability of the homeowners to pay. Even though there's income sensitivity in Act 60, the difference between their ability to pay and their cost of home ownership has gone up to the point where many people are really struggling. When I'm out there in the community talking to people, struggling to maintain their own homes. And so we need to take a look at how we're funding education. We need to come up with a system that's more fair. There's no incentive right now for any town to control their cost of education.
15 seconds.
The town of New Haven made a substantial cut in their education costs a year ago, and we still saw a substantial increase in the cost of education. I was looking for the legislature to correct some changes by giving a 1 cent on the grand list reduction for those towns that met the challenges for change. That was taken out of the bill, and it was unfortunate because that said to me that it really doesn't matter. We don't have any incentive to control the cost of education.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire.
As many of you know, I taught school at Mount Abe for 20 years. I was a middle and high school math teacher, but I was also a department head. And each year, as a department head, we traveled around to the various sending districts in our town, in the Northeast Addison district, and we had to defend our budgets as a department to the community. However, the upshot of that is that the property tax is mostly around the cost of the people, the professionals, the support staff, the administrators. It's only about 15% is the cost of doing business in a school. Now, you take that part that's the people part of the property tax, and my salary was only going up about 1 to 3% a year with the cost of living. The benefits package, on the other hand, and health care, the big part of that, was going up 10, 12% a year. There's another reason why we've got to get health costs under control, because it will have a direct and positive impact on property taxes. There are other things. I've already mentioned the per pupil costs. Embedded in that are things like transportation. Every district has a very elaborate and expensive bus system, and as fuel prices go up, the cost of transporting students goes up. Admin costs. There have been incentives put out there by the legislature, by the state, to invite districts to put their heads together and come up with ways to consolidate the administrative parts of their districts so that they can reduce the cost of administration. So those are 3 different areas where we really have to work on: healthcare, admin costs, and transportation, as ways to affect the cost of education and thereby bring property taxes down, or at least not let them go up quite so fast.
Thank you. Mr. Wagner.
The ACSU set its sights on the small school in Ripton where my son goes, and behind that, foreclosure, and behind that is something called Act 155. It's a means of taking away accountability for the budget, so that now your budget used to be controlled by a local school board. Now it goes into the bureaucracy, and they can close small schools at will. Well, not overnight, but there's a drive to close the small schools that are doing such a great job. The question is, why does this bureaucracy, the bureaucrat to student ratio, why is it so huge? Why is it so expensive? That's really unique in Vermont. And none of the sitting legislators have taken a look at that, and to me that's incredible. Act 60 was originally intended to give us more equity, and what it's done is squeeze us, and our property taxes keep going up and up and up. This is the number one thing I hear from people. They can't afford to live anymore. We look at how our property tax is valued. It's not really a tax on the land itself. It's a tax on your improvements to the land. So you try to do better. You try to make a better place. You try to do something with your land, and the state squeezes you.
15 seconds.
Well known in economics, you tax something more, there's going to be less of it. You tax productivity, there's less of it. We need land value taxation. Tax those land speculators that are making 17% per year tax-free in Vermont.
Thank you. Mr. Bray?
Thank you, Bruce. I think, it's clearly a sober and challenging topic, but I want to step one step back and celebrate the fact that Vermont has some of the best schools in the nation, and that our kids regularly do well on tests nationally as well as in the Northeast. And the point of that to me is that we are always talking about how are our kids going to do, how are they going to be well educated, how are they going to move into the workforce and find a good job, how are they going to become good citizens. So I think I really just want to make sure that as we focus on controlling costs, which I think is essential, that we also pause and celebrate the value of the system we have. We are getting good outcomes in our school system. And the challenge in part, as it's been mentioned numerous times already, we have a declining enrollment. So as students decrease in numbers in ones and twos, it doesn't necessarily mean you get to leave an entire building, close an entire room. You're still heating it. You still have that infrastructure to maintain. So costs can stay, the per pupil costs can end up staying higher than over time when you have a period of declining enrollments. And some schools have looked at consolidation, but it turns out that it's a very challenging thing, because In most communities, every community I've lived in, the school is the heart of that community. It's
15
where
seconds.
You grow up, you meet other parents, your kids learn to be part of your community. There's a great social value in public schools, local schools, community schools that doesn't appear on a balance sheet. So, yes, we have to control costs, but I just want to make sure we recognize the great value of what we have as we go through the discussion.
Thank you. Our third question pertains to state pensions. Unfunded liabilities for teacher and state employee pensions and post-retirement benefits are among the highest in the country, in Vermont. What do you propose we do about this? And the first one on this question is Representative Lanfer.
Pensions are an issue at times, and they have been identified. The recent joint fiscal report from committees that are working on this and getting updates on our revenue on a regular basis have identified issues going forward. One of them being looking out long range, have identified that there's some problem areas there. And in specific, the teachers system is one that is being watched very carefully, and we are currently receiving very specific information on that. Now, that said, I know that I have great hopes because I have worked with a very large team in Montpelier before on some very tough pension issues. I don't know if you recall that wasn't that long ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, I think it was in 2009, that we dealt with teachers' retirement issues as well as the Vermont State Employees Union issues, looking at their systemic viability going long term. We're looking at the road out there, and we will make adjustments. Seconds. So there's a very professional, steady team at the helm here. They've identified the issues, and I am pleased to be working with and know that our current treasurer, Beth Pierce, our fiscal office, legislators, and the administration are working together. Beth, along with Jeb Spalding, helped to work to save the state of Vermont up to $20 million every year in the work that they've recently done on retirement issues. So our relationship in Montpelier on this and other financial matters is key to our bond rating, which on the Transportation Committee, to me, is sacred.
Representative Clark.
The state employee and teacher retirement pension programs have been identified as, we know that there's a concern, and I think that probably for years we were dealing with other things, and that can, as it does throughout the whole country, seems to get kicked down the road. But I think there are people that are looking at it seriously, and I think in resolving what could be a major concern financially, I think one of the things that we've got to do is take a look at benefits provided in future years for people maybe that are just getting started in state government or in teachers, in the teacher system. For people like me who are on their way out of the teacher system, of course, we want to make no changes at all. But again, I think that's part of the dilemma. What is it that you do, and what is it that you intend to do? And I think the state policy ought to be that whatever promises we've made in the past, we will keep. Those promises made in the future perhaps ought to be made a little bit more carefully than those in the past. It'll be looked at, it'll be dealt with, and I think it'll be taken care of to the majority of pensioners. Concerns will be taken care of, but I think I'm glad that we're beginning to relook at it again and not put it off for years.
Ms. Holzapfel?
Thanks, Bruce. Like most people, when I'm confronted with a question, I Google it. We were given the phrase state pension unfunded liabilities, so I Googled it, and the first hit was a report from the Pew Center of the States in 2010 talking about how all these states are having this problem, and there was a state-by-state report, and actually Vermont, I was surprised to hear in the phrasing of the question that our unfunded liabilities are among the highest in the country, because according to that Pew report on Vermont, Vermont is actually in a pretty good condition compared to other states, from my understanding. Another thing I remembered was hearing a month or two ago on the radio, probably from Gail Parmalee, that that our bond rating had been upgraded. So I looked for that and found that in mid-September, Moody's and Fitch had continued our AAA bond rating, and Standard & Poor's had improved the outlook on its AA plus bond rating, in part based on how well Vermont is addressing the unfunded pension issues. So I think we're doing a great job. I think we have, particularly in Beth Pierce, a team that's headed by a good person who knows what to do, and we're doing the best we can.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire.
Well, I sit here as a beneficiary of the teacher pension. I get a check every month. I contributed in. The money went to the state invested it, and now I'm taking it back out again, just as it should be. It's what those of us expect a pension look forward to. And I frankly, having looked at the data that you just heard, have every confidence that the state is going to manage the pension funds well, that the money will be there when I need it as I grow older. And beyond that, I'm just confident that the state of Vermont will, in fact, live up to its obligations.
Thank you. Representative Smith.
Yes, thank you. I think the state should live up to its obligations, but it also ought to look at the program we have. And I give you an example. We had the state college system a few years ago was in a position where the state pension and retirement programs were going to kind of take over the state college system. And I remember in the legislature it was a very difficult process. And when I say take over, the dollars would be going into retired teachers' pension. They had a very lucrative program, and it would have eventually meant that there would be much fewer students, or many fewer students, that would be able to go through the system simply because of the dollars going into retirement programs. So we need to take a really good, hard look over that. The state did make a contract with the state teachers, and we need to live up to that contract, but I think it's time that we revisit that. And for some future generation of teachers coming in, we need to probably put in place a different type of a pension program, or different values on there, so that they can plan for their future as well. A lot of us in the private sector have had to put money aside for retirement, and I know a lot of the teachers do as well. But I think we need to look at the whole system. When David Coates gave his report, I don't know the one that was just mentioned here, but when we've got a pension deficit substantially larger than 1 year's budget for the state of Vermont, that's a serious problem that we need to take a look at.
Thank you. Mr. Bray.
Thank you. I guess I want to step back a little from the issue again. The total obligations out there are roughly $1.2 billion owed to, in terms of unfunded pension liabilities for the state employees and teachers, and another 1.8 in future health care benefits. Prior to 2007, before we went into the greatest recession since the Great Depression, our state employees were funded at 100.8% of those unfunded, of those future liabilities. So we had a very robust and well-funded system. It's really a giant trust fund. As Ed McGuire mentioned, everyone's paying in, the state's investing that money, the return that comes out goes to pay future benefits. We just went through this great recession, and so every portfolio of every pension system around the country took a large loss, just like individuals. So those things are all in recovery now, and I think the state has been very prudent in the way it's managed things. I mean, that sort of attitude started with Governor Jim Douglas, who was a treasurer when we first got a AAA bond rating. It went on through Jeb Spaulding's term, and Beth Pierce has continued to work. So I think we have careful managers who have managed things through good times and bad, and we're I think, going to come out of this fine. We are watching carefully. We're making all the best adjustments we can. There have been a number of adjustments in the last 2 years, as I think it was Diane may have mentioned. Recent changes save the state of Vermont roughly $20 million a year. So I have a lot of confidence in the professional team that we have, regardless of party, and that will, as the economy recovers, those underlying trust funds will recover, and that we'll do better over time.
Thank you. Mr. Wagner.
I disagree. The economy is not recovering. Vermont's finances are fairly close to collapse. However, what you can do to answer your own question is look at the ending fund balance reports, the CAFR reports. That shows that Vermont has a lot of money, but it's being thrown, good money after bad, into Wall Street. When I started running for the Senate in 2010, one of my planks was get Vermont's money out of Wall Street. Start a state bank, just like North Dakota did. North Dakota was not touched by the Great Recession, Great Depression, whatever you call it, big bubble burst of 2008. Take a look at what North Dakota is doing, and we should learn from it. We need to get our money out of that casino that is Wall Street, and put it into a state bank for investment in business and private enterprise here at home, not in China.
Thank you. Representative Jewett.
Thank you, Bruce. And I really appreciate getting this question a little bit in advance because it allowed me to do a little bit of research. And so I'm going to cite my sources first. I've consulted with the Joint Fiscal Office website, Treasurer Beth Pierce, Appropriations Chair Martha Heath, my GovOps Chair Donna Swaney, and I listened to a VPR rebroadcast last night as well where David Coates was on. So I'm going to do just the facts. The state employee system is at or above 80% of funding. That actually meets the standards of the Government Accountability Committee or office. The gap, however, in that 80% to 100% is $461 million. The teacher's retirement is not in as good shape. It's funded at 63.8%. That was as of 6/30/2011, and the gap there is $845 million, give or take. Maybe different now because we're a year later. The total there is $1.2 billion. It is not the $300 billion that my opponent has cited in a postcard that I received at home last night. I think that kind of misinformation is frankly irresponsible. Now, I've spoken with Beth Pierce. You want to think about this $1.2 billion as a mortgage. These are not immediate obligations. This is an obligation we owe over the next 30 years or so. You don't pay your mortgage off overnight, and you don't pay $1.2 billion off overnight. Treasurer Pierce deserves a lot of credit, and she deserves our vote and our support in the ballot box for saving us $20 million a year by negotiating with the employees. She has a plan to pay this off over the next 25 years, and we have been, will continue to do that.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Ryan.
I mean, I did know that it was $3 billion, so it must have been a typo. But this just shows in my opinion, it shows the lack of responsibility of the state of Vermont. It's just now, all of a sudden, we realize we have this unfunded liability. This has been, why haven't we been funding this for the last 20 years? And it's my understanding a third of our workforce is going to retire in the next 5 years. So it's simply how we're going to pay for this is we're just going to raise taxes. Somewhere we're going to have to raise more money to pay for this. There's no other way that we're going to be able to pay for it. And it's just another example of the irresponsible, behavior in Montpelier where us working Vermonters, we go out and we work hard, and us small businessmen, and we give people jobs, and you know what? We just pay, and we pay, and we pay. And I don't know how much longer we can afford to keep paying for these mistakes that keep being made over and over again. Thank you.
Thank you. Our fourth question in our forum today pertains to Vermont's tax policy. And I'd ask the candidates, do you favor expanding the state's sales tax to include a sales tax on services? And for this question, we begin with Representative Smith.
I'm going to struggle with supporting any new taxes. When I talk to my constituents out there, everybody is really struggling to make ends meet. And I don't care what kind of where they are in the economic strata of income. I'm finding that people are finding the pinch of the slowdown in the economy, even though their salaries may be somewhere around where they were before the recession started. Some of them have seen a decrease in that. But their buying power, their ability to use those monies to have the standard of living that they had prior to this recession has receded some. And when we continue to increase funding for, federal government, state government, local government, and cost of living, my constituents, for the majority of them, just don't have the kind of dollars to support all these growth in the program. So unless we can substantially increase the economic climate in the state, increase jobs, increase pay scales, salaries that are coming in, I don't see how we can realistically sit there and say we're going to raise a lot of new taxes without taking a hard look of finding more efficiencies in the way we deliver our government programs.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire?
This is a topic that I frankly haven't got much background or knowledge in. I sense that the idea of taxing services is driven in part by the fact that the state needs more revenue. So this brings me back to other things that we can be doing in the state to reduce costs. And I go back to health care. If we can get that one under control and costing us less, the driver will be reduced somewhat. Energy is very expensive. And I'm noting that there's a project in the works to bring Vermont gas down through from Chittenden County into Addison County, which would help reduce energy costs, particularly for the users that are high in energy users. But more than anything, as our country comes out of this recession and recovers more jobs, expanding economy, we will find ourselves in a better financial position overall from the existing taxes. So I frankly don't know why we really have to find more sources, and I'll be working on it in the legislature, I assume.
Thank you. Mr. Wagner?
I don't base finance on pie in the sky and an assumption that economy will recover and that dollars will flow from the federal government. Where is it coming from? A federal government that borrows $300 billion a month just to keep itself open is not sustainable. Whatever happens down there in Washington, D.C. isn't our business. We can't affect it, but we can affect what happens in Montpelier. One day after the election 2 years ago, I started a tax policy research institute called Prosper Vermont, advocating a tax shift from productive activity, from business, from wages, from building, from farms, from assets, from earnings, from all productive activity over to non-productive activity. Land speculation is the biggest, but they're powerful people. They've got powerful lobbyists in Montpelier, and whatever we say here today and whatever we agree to, something else is going to be done in Montpelier. If you raise taxes, you're going to have less revenue. If you have sales tax, you're going to have less sales. And now they're talking about sales tax on services. We're going to have less services. This happens each and every time. Look at your history. We don't need a tax on sales. New Hampshire doesn't have it. So the argument that we have to be like other states doesn't wash. Why not? Why shouldn't Vermont be a place where people can go to buy stuff, to buy services? Why aren't we a marketplace? Because they tax us into the ground. That has to stop, and it has to stop now. Thank you.
Mr. Bray?
Just come back to the original question, which was about supporting a sales tax on services. That was one of the recommendations that was offered up for consideration by the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission that Governor Douglas put together. So that was, and we had local folks actually on that panel. So Deb Brighton, Bill Sayre, and Bill Schubart all worked very hard for a year and a half on putting together a report. It was submitted to the legislature. I think it came in when there was a session already launched and running, so a very difficult time to pick up a whole new look at the world of taxing. And I think it will get discussed again, I hope, more carefully going into this next session. I think the rationale for talking about taxing services is that we've moved from a manufacturing economy to a service economy. So things that we used to tax that raised the revenues for the state, those numbers have declined, and so the idea was to basically modernize tax, not increase tax. I think it could be, let's be careful to say, it might well be revenue neutral. No
15 seconds.
Net increase in taxes, but just different things taxed. So sales tax, for instance, might go down as you built a new tax. The challenge is that we live in a national economy. As Robert alluded, it doesn't exist in New Hampshire. So I'd want to be very careful not to do anything that disadvantaged Vermont businesses. And then the last thing is, I don't think we're going to tax our way to prosperity. We're not going to cut our way to prosperity. I think the main thing is to grow a healthier, stronger economy that allows us, as an ambitious state, to do more of the things we want to do for ourselves.
Thank you. Mr. Ryan.
A service tax would be devastating to the construction business. This would be a tax that could not be passed on to the consumer. I own a painting business. There's no way I can go to somebody's house, give them an estimate to paint their house for $10,000, and then add 5 or 6% on top of that tax. That tax, I would have to absorb that tax. And there's no way that this would be revenue neutral. If you take a business that grosses a couple $100,000 a year and they have to absorb a 4, 5, 6%, that comes right off their gross. That's before their net. And it would be totally devastating to the construction business. And you look at every service, person who mows your lawn, your cleaning lady, your painter, your plumber, you're going to charge taxes on all these services. The piece of pie is only so big in the state of Vermont. And you're going to take 5% of that piece of pie right off the top on a gross tax. It would be devastating. It would be the first step to pure bankruptcy in the state of Vermont. And there's no way I would ever support any tax on any form of services.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Jewett.
Thank you, Bruce. Hey, I love a question on tax policy because if there's one area we can argue on forever, it's tax policy. I want to appreciate many of the things that Chris said because he gave a background for where this idea came from. Out of the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission, it's steeped in tax wonkiness, but when you boil it out, it's about the thought was about broadening the base and lowering the rates. Now this is something that everyone says on the campaign trail, but then when you try and do it, everyone says no. So what do we have? We end up we raise a bunch of money, and we have a shadow budget over here, which is exemptions. And Dave Sharp has done good work on this. It rivals the amount of money that we actually raise. So everyone says broaden the base, lower the rates. That's what the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission says, and yet I will tell you, I'm not going to support it. I'm not going to support it because of my experience as the vote counter of the House. Especially with respect to sales tax, you can't get enough votes to pass this. The issues with New Hampshire are real. The governor is right. It wouldn't be bad if we could drop that 6% rate down to 2%. And we could, but we'd have to eliminate all kinds of exemptions. We'd have to apply the tax not just to services, as Mr. Ryan points out, but to food. And that's not going to play politically. We're stuck where we are. Everyone's going to tell you we support broadening the base, lower the rates, and I don't know whether we're going to get there. I'm not supporting this proposal. And I want to tell you that it's being trumpeted by $1 million super PAC up in Burlington. That's where this thing is getting all the play. Super PAC brought to you by Citizens United. And it's disturbing that Citizens United has brought that here where we now have unlimited campaign spending.
Thank you. Representative Clark?
I'm not supporting the new plan idea either at this point. And I think everybody before me has mentioned some very good points. Even if it's neutral to raising of taxes, I think Willem and others have hit on what's really important. It's the exemptions. If we could pass something in the legislature in which there were few, if any, exemptions, that increase in the sales tax might very well work out, but it just never, it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. And I think it's something that needs to be discussed. I am very willing to listen to the proposal. I'm not shutting up. I'm not going to skip the meetings. I'm very willing to listen to the proposal. But I think Willem and others have mentioned ahead of me that when push comes to shove, we just struggle to pass anything like this. If politicians are trying to buy more votes in the legislature by adding more exemptions, then when you get through, why bother? You've got nothing but a new watered-down tax bill that might or might not be revenue neutral. So it's worth discussing because that's what we do in the legislature. At this point, I wouldn't be in favor of supporting it.
Thank you. Ms. Holzapfel?
I think the focus needs to be on jobs. I'll use our household as an example, as I have in almost every question I've answered so far. I do a lot of my shopping in Virgins, particularly at Linda's Apparel and Gifts on Main Street. I think if Linda pays much attention, she can probably tell what the employment level in our household is, because when we're both fully employed, I'm there a lot more often and I'm buying a lot more things. And expanding that, to the whole community, when there's better levels of employment, people are buying more stuff, they're collecting more sales tax, they're hiring more people, and that in turn, increases the tax base. A business owner hires people when there's a higher demand for their product or service, and that's best for the business and best for the state. So they do not hire people when they get a tax break. So I think the emphasis needs to be on jobs as a means of building our tax base.
Thank you. And finally, Representative Lanfer.
Thank you. Let me start off by when I see those two words on a page, tax policy or taxes, what it means to me when I approach that whole subject area, and it's kind of a definition of where I go. Taxes are the means that we use, to gather our resources, to gather all of us, right, so that we can allocate in a manner to which we all decide we want to live in, what the community is that we want to live in. That's what we do. We look at the tax policy to decide where do we want to go, how do we want to live, and we raise taxes to support that all together. Now, many people before me have referenced the same report that I went directly to, which is that Blue Ribbon Tax Report that was commissioned in 2009 and came out in 2011. Some of the things that were in there were 6 particular findings, and one of them was to actually bring to our attention what they saw happening in Vermont's sales tax world, which was that at one time in the past, in the not so distant past, 70% of consumer spending was on products and 30% of a consumer spending was on services. That has now totally reversed. We now, as a consumer, spend 30% of our dollars on product and 70% of our dollars on services. So that's where the crux of where you see this conversation that people are looking at wanting to tax services. I am with Willem and others who have stated that, looking at that idea and expanding that opportunity or looking at what we have is probably not going to fly. But other pieces to that report have made some significant strides, and with limited time, I just want to touch on the expenditures. There has been work in the previous legislature now for us to examine, and I'm sure Representative Sharp will speak to this even more so, over every year to examine 1/3 of the expenditures so that every 3 years we, as a legislative body, your representatives in your eyes, have an opportunity to view what they are and decide if there's still something of value to continue with.
Thank you. Okay, now that we've heard from all the candidates in the contested races, the candidates in some of the uncontested seats will have 2 minutes to speak on any topic they wish, and we'll begin with Representative Nuovo.
On the health care issue and the funding, that's coming up in January. And I'm willing to wait till that, and if they want an extra month, that's fine with me also. On the education issue, we need to follow the Constitution and treat each child equally. Unfortunately, the state only can afford $8,000 plus. I forget the exact number, but it's in the $8,000 to $9,000 range for each student. If the school wants more money and has a budget of $15,000 per child, $12,000 per child, $18,000 per child, the town has to pay that extra difference. If it gets too high, they have to give money back to the school. It's trying to cut down the cost of education. On the unfunded liabilities, that happened mostly in 2008 when problems arose around the whole nation. And the state has been putting in the required amount each year, plus other money to bring it back where it belongs. We also did some of the following. We rolled the three funds into $1 amount so that we could get better. If you have more money to invest, you can get better deals. And of course, they keep track of it, but having it all together helps. And we used to get a lot of interest rates. We get 7%, 8%, 20%, whatever before 2008. And now we're getting 1%, 2%, 3%, 5%. So that makes a big difference, the amount of income that comes in from this. So that's a difficult issue. I want to talk also about energy a little bit. We want have a lot of energy, and people are saying, well, it's going to cost a lot of money. Let's take dams, for example. The dams are already there. They've been there for 40 years. And there's some of their contracts are running out, and they need a little money to upgrade and keep them there working. We also helping manure, dairy manure, to turn it into energy. And in the future, we're going to have food on that issue also. On taxes, I'm not in favor of taxes on services. And I'd have to add that I've been talking a lot about trades. The trades, there's so many trades, different kinds of nursing, roofing, plumbing, electricity, sidewalks, asphalt, and so forth, and trades. And Hannaford is really trying its best to have a lot of work for mechanics, and they're just doing butchering and of animals for trade. So we need to work on that, because in one company, the youngest person in that trade is 60 years old. The youngest person is 60 years old.
We have 15 seconds, okay?
Okay, so we have to try and work this out by community. It's not an easy job. I don't know the answers to any of it, but we need to make sure we have people. It's good money, it's good jobs, and we need to work on this.
Thank you. Representative Dave Sharp.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting this event. I need to address some of the false and misleading statements that have been on the air and in the mail during this campaign. The notion that Democrats are a tax party and the Republicans are not just does not hold water. The last governor to raise the sales tax was Republican Jim Douglas, and the last governor to raise income taxes was Republican Dick Snelling. Conversely, Peter Shumlin was president of the Senate, and Democrat Shap Smith, the Speaker of the House, when we last reduced income taxes. And before that, the last governor to reduce income taxes was Democrat Howard Dean. Why education property taxes have had to go up in the last 2 years was neither a Republican nor a Democratic action, but rather the result of declining grand list values and local voters' decisions to fully fund the education of our youth. The legislature actually has reduced the state-based property income tax property tax rate, penny rate for residents from the statutory $1.10 when Act 60 was passed to the current level of 89 cents. This was despite the increased student costs, and it was because of the increased grand list values. The statements that Democrats are proposing the largest increase in Vermont history, tax increase in Vermont history, with regard to the single-payer system, leaves off the second half of the sentence that the proposal also is for the largest reduction in health care insurance premiums in Vermont history. It should be noted that of the $5 billion insinuated in the news that we will have to be raised in taxes, $3 billion is already being paid for by taxes through Medicare and Medicaid. An additional amount of the $1.8 billion in private insurance, much is for teachers, state employees, and municipal employees, which is also being paid for currently out of taxes. This leaves some private insurance and out-of-pocket health care dollars that have to be accounted for in the single-payer health care system under consideration. The real additional tax dollars, though still probably the largest tax increase in Vermont's history, is probably less than $1 billion. Still a big number, but not what's being portrayed to be in the electioneering noise out there. Remember that the governor has committed to not going forward with this unless the new system will create better outcomes for Vermonters for less money. That's the real work that we need to do in the coming years. If we cannot find ways to reduce the costs in the healthcare system, it doesn't matter whether we're in the current system or in a single-payer system or some other newfangled system, we will be crushed under the increasing costs of healthcare. Under the leadership of Beth Pierce, we have improved the pension outlook considerably, and we will do so again if necessary. With regard to sales tax, the really big problem with sales tax is the erosion to internet sales.
You have 15 seconds.
Thank you. And this is unfair because it really burdens our local merchants, and it's not good for Vermont. The work we need to do is bringing streamlined sales tax and apply our sales tax fairly across the board so that our local Vermont Main Street businesses can remain successful. And as has been alluded to a couple of times, exemptions remain a huge problem that I will continue to work on in the legislature. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Paul Ralston.
Thank you. Since it's a national election cycle as well as a state one, and since whenever we have a 4-year cycle, jobs is the big issue, we've been having conversations today about costs of programs, costs of funding retirement, costs of educating children. And we've been talking on the fringes of how we would pay for that, what kind of tax reform we might make, what kind of exemptions we might eliminate. Dave will tell you that the largest exemption, tax exemption in the state, is the exemption that we all homeowners have for the interest that they pay on their mortgage. So what politician is going to stand up and say, I'm going to eliminate the exemption for mortgage deduction? Another very small one is the sales tax on coffins. Now, who's going to stand up and say that at a family's time of worst trauma that we're going to tax them for the casket that they're going to bury their loved one in? These things are very, very difficult politically. There is another solution, and that solution is a responsible and sustainable growth in our economy. When you look at how we fund education through the property tax, there are different rates between the residential rate and the commercial rate. We need to carefully and systematically improve the value of our commercial real estate. In the town of Middlebury, we're very fortunate to have some growing businesses. One that makes the best hard cider in the world is going to be building a new plant in Middlebury, and when they do, That building, which may cost $20 or $30 million, is going to be an important part of our tax base. And that tax base, they'll pay a higher rate than residents will, and that will be a good thing. That will provide relief for residential taxpayers. We talk about, we listen to the presidential candidates, even the gubernatorial candidates, and they argue what they can do to improve or increase jobs, what they can do to create jobs. And the fact of the matter is that government can do nothing to create jobs other than to hire more government workers. And I don't think you'll see that happening anytime soon. What government can do is, and what in a state like Vermont is very important, is we can change our attitude towards growth. We can change our attitude towards business. We can promote the idea that growth can be responsible, growth can be sustainable, and that we can do it in a way where we don't trade off our important social, community, and environmental values. I've recently started a new business, and one of my partners in the business, when we were talking about where we might locate the facility, there's a logical place where we would do this, and that person was reluctant even to consider it because the idea of entering into an Act 250 review was frightening. Not because Act 250 is a bad law or that its ideals and intentions are wrong, but it's that it is unpredictable, time-consuming, and expensive. We can still maintain the quality and control that we want over our environment and our community life and still make it more approachable for people to consider expanding physically in Vermont. New jobs will only come
15 seconds.
From existing employers finding new markets or from new employers starting up or moving to the state. In either of those cases, growth is going to mean physical expansion, and it's going to need permit review and reform. To paraphrase Yogi Berra, business is 90% psychological, and the other half is financial.
Thank you. Representative Mike Fisher.
Well, it's been interesting to sit here for an hour plus listening to other people answer questions. I guess let me just start by saying I am proud to be a part of what I think is the best delegation in the state. We work as a team on behalf of this county, on behalf of people of the state of Vermont, in a way like no other county delegation does. And I have to respond a little bit to the notion that we're in the pockets of lobbyists from out of state who are driving our agenda. It just ain't true. Spend a little time at the State House, spend a little time with any one of us, and you'll see a really different, you'll see people who are really committed to good public policy, doing the darn best they can to find the best answers available to us and working their tails off to do it. So I think I'm supposed to speak about healthcare, though. So there are four, it's nice to boil down our entire healthcare effort into four main goals. We want to increase access to everyone in our state, increase the access for all Vermonters. We want to reduce the rate of growth in healthcare spending. We want to improve the quality of the healthcare that people get. And we want to find a fairer way to raise the money that we raise currently to pay for it. That doesn't sound like a radical, crazy idea, set of principles. And I think if you measure every idea that every step that we're taking from blueprint to health to this concept of coming up with what I call a unified financing system, it's all in line with that. And these are big goals and ones that the administration and now the legislature are working, shoulder to shoulder on. It's a big system to change. You often hear politicians say a line something like, our healthcare system is broken. We need to be really careful when we say that, because there are serious problems in our healthcare system, yet there are real successes. Right? We have in the audience here a few providers who partner with people in our community to do the best job they can to provide good care. And so, and I myself, in my day job, am in a fashion a healthcare provider. I spent the last couple days working with people from around the state trying to come up with better approaches to reach some of the toughest populations, the folks that cost us the most, in terms of how to deliver better care to them, how to engage them in taking advantage of care when they need it so that they don't cost us more in the long run. And so it's an important effort and one that we're working hard on. And I haven't heard the 15-second line yet, but it's probably
because I'm going to say it right now.
So, but I will say that much sooner than Green Mountain Care, as Willem alluded to, you know, the health benefit exchange is coming, and it does represent a real change for most Vermonters in the way that they access health insurance products. And that change is going to be really good for most all of us. But it is a change, and it is one that we're going to need to all engage in educating, particularly in the business community, about how that change, how that will change the way employers and employees work on health benefits.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Representative Will Stevens.
Thank you, Bruce. It usually takes me about 10 minutes to warm up, so I'll give it my best shot here in these closing moments. But I guess as I've sit here the last hour and a half listening to articulate people talking about important issues, it struck me that how important a service you're providing, MCT's providing, MCTV, and the Chamber of Commerce have provided by hosting this forum. And I say that not gratuitously. I'm a believer in participatory democracy. And as I think of what's my role in the State House, my day job is an organic market gardener. We've been doing that for 31 years. So why am I in the State House? What do I have to offer and so forth? Well, what I do up there is weigh alternate truths. And what you've done here today is provide opportunity for those contested districts, the people who live in those contested districts, to weigh alternate truths and make good decisions. And that's, to me, what service in the State House is all about. As I said, I'm a believer in participatory democracy, so I'm a little stumped by the first, being in the position of, for the first time in 4 runs for the House, not having an opponent. I'm kind of, what am I supposed to do up that? But I'll get through that.
All right.
I'll get over it.
We're working on that, Will.
You have. So let me just quickly say that what I'm interested in the State House is sustainable economic development for Vermont. And what that means to me are those things over which we have a whole lot of control. It involves our brand or our image, our people, and our natural resources, and sustainable use of our natural resources. And some of the work we did last year on the Working Lands Enterprise Bill reflects that, and I'm looking forward to continuing to serve the people of Addison Rutland in that capacity as we go forward. And thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much to everyone. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we're not going to have time to take questions from the audience. However, I will ask all the candidates and the legislators to stick around for a few minutes so you can address any constituent concerns. That will conclude our forum for today. On behalf of the Addison County Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to thank our host, the Ilsley Public Library, and all the candidates who took part in our discussion today. Election Day is coming up on November 6th, and regardless of who you vote for, the important thing to remember is that your vote does count. On behalf of the Addison County Chamber of Commerce, I'm Bruce Zeman from 92.1 WVTK. Thank you for joining us today.